Welcome, everyone. Hopefully you can still see the slides. We'll just introduce a few things before we get started here today. So welcome to this Radio Shop chat that's organized by SpectrumX, the NSF Spectrum Innovation Center. My name is Nick Lanneman. I'm professor of electrical engineering at the University of Notre Dame, and I'm serving as center director for SpectrumX. In a moment, I will introduce our associate director, Scott Palo, who will introduce today's speaker, Dr. Tanya Ennis. Before I do so, let me just remind you of a few things about SpectrumX in this series. So first of all, SpectrumX is the world's largest academic hub through which all stakeholders can collaborate and innovate to make the best use of the precious radio frequency spectrum to benefit society. Second, the purpose of these Radio Shop chats, this series as a whole, is to bring the community together, to educate, to debate, to inspire next steps in the collaborative research, workforce development, and policy outreach that we're pursuing as a center. Third, the Radio Shop chats follow the Chatham House rule. And we are recording the session, but until we produce the session publicly, participants are free to use the materials that they learn here today, the information they receive, but neither the identity nor the affiliation of the speakers nor any other participant may be revealed without permission. So thank you once again for participating. We hope that you will enjoy today's chat, and please spread the word and get involved in SpectrumX. And now I'll hand it over to Scott Palo, who will introduce our speaker.
Great. Well, thanks, Nick. And it's my pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Tanya Ennis. And if you would bear with me, I would like to give you a little bit of Tanya's bio and background to set the context for today. So Dr. Tanya Ennis is the Broadening Participation Director for the SpectrumX Center and for the Research Support Office at the University of Colorado Boulder College of Engineering and Applied Science. She received her bachelor's in electrical engineering from Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and her master's in computer engineering from the University of Southern California in Los Angeles, California. She also recently received her PhD in education and learning sciences and human development from the University of Colorado Boulder School of Education, PhD Education, Learning Sciences, and Human Development from University of Colorado Boulder, where the School of Education Faculty Committee awarded her the Outstanding Dissertation Award for a dissertation entitled Yearning to Learn, a Qualitative Comparative Analysis of Black Engineering Students Deciding to Stay or Leave Engineering Majors. So, as a low socioeconomic first-generation college student who grew up in Louisiana, Dr. Ennis encountered multiple factors that impacted her decision to study engineering, to graduate and pursue a career in telecommunications with AT&T Bell Laboratories, US West Communications, and Cobad Communications, where she developed and implemented large-scale systems. After a career in the communication industry, Dr. Ennis transitioned into teaching high school mathematics with an emphasis on educating students of color who struggled with learning mathematics. She later began her career at CU Boulder, where she directed the Engineering Gold Shirt program and the Bold Center, where engineering students, where she directed design to support and engage underrepresented students to succeed as engineering students. Dr. Ennis also taught introductory physics and engineering project design. Additionally, she created new curriculum to serve students needing additional academic instruction, especially for the calculus sequence. As a member of the ASEE, she is presented numerous papers on the Engineering Gold Shirt program. So with that, I'd like to turn the floor over to Dr. Tanya Ennis to give her presentation.
Thank you, Scott, for that wonderful introduction, and for Nick for setting the stage for this Radio Shop chat. And thank all of you for joining us today. I am going to share my screen here and talk to you today about my dissertation, Should I Stay? Should I Go? My actual dissertation had a different name, but the topic that we're talking about today is Black engineering students deciding to stay or leave engineering majors. So the first thing I'd like to do is our land acknowledgement. The University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of Indigenous peoples in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought on Indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with Indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We will do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of Indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty and their work. Educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating Indigenous knowledge. Consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support and to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. And so today, as we think about February, it's Black History Month. We celebrate Black History Month every month. It is every month. And so every day, we honor the lives of Black people everywhere who are in Africa and around the world as a part of the African diaspora. Every day, we celebrate the ancestors whose free labor built much of the United States of America and who fought for the rights and privileges that we enjoy today. Every day, we celebrate the countless contributions that Black people have made to the world. And every day, we take a moment of silence for Black lives ended at the hand of violence. And I just invite you to take a few seconds of silence right now. Thank you for that. And so today, as I share my research with you, I wanted just to provide a larger context about the dissertation. As we know, engineering discipline lacks diversity in many areas, and especially as it relates to attracting, recruiting, retaining, and graduating Black engineering students. Of those Black engineering students who study engineering, many leave the college, engineering college, before graduating without an engineering degree. The low enrollment and high attrition of Black engineering students are detrimental to the engineering college and to the generation of knowledge, innovation, and problem solving. So we're missing out on that. The low enrollment, we know that diverse engineering teams foster better innovation and the creation of novel ideas. So we need to understand better what drives the retention and the attrition of Black engineering students. So we aim to understand why they're making the decisions to stay or leave engineering. And so my 3 research questions were around understanding the retention rates of Black engineering students and how they're changing over time, and how the intervention programs figure into the navigation of the university and their major. And then what aspects of the students' experiences are related to students' decisions to stay or leave? And so I'm going to go into that really deeply and share with you what my findings were. So I know this is a busy slide, but I wanted to give you kind of my guiding conceptual framework as I thought about what I thought was affecting students making the decisions to stay or leave. One of the big parts of my conceptual framework is this racialized social environment, which includes all of the things you're seeing to the left in the oval, with stereotyping, positioning students as incapable, this concept called invisibilization, microaggressions, racism-related stress, the racial climate, and lots of other factors that go into the students' experience in the racialized environments. And then from that, students are having these psychological responses. Some may have what we call this robust, resilient response, where there's this positive outlook that no matter what happens, they're smart enough to succeed and so forth. Academic support, they get in this virtuous cycle where they're always learning and always improving, developing a sense of belonging, and that would make them stay. And then, will influence their decision to stay in engineering. And then on the other hand, some of the psychological responses could have students having this fragile response where they're always having to prove people wrong and show up in places to prove themselves, and then can get caught in a vicious cycle and spiral where they're being isolated racially and encountering stress, and then they make their decision to leave. So this was kind of my concept of what was happening with the students. I wanted to take a minute to talk about my participation, my recruitment of participants in this study. I really had to work hard to reduce this power differential and spend a lot of time developing trust with these students. The research was conducted at a large Western Research One university. And so I took a lot of care to make sure that I had colleagues as neutral researchers to help me to eliminate the possibility of coercion. And, folks were working with them on the front end to obtain their participant consent, because I wanted to eliminate any fear the participants would have of retaliation or me responding in a different way. I've worked in the diversity space with engineering students for a long time. And so I wanted to make sure that that I made an effort to make students feel welcome and supported. And so I also relied on my neutral research colleagues to reach out to those students who were leavers, the folks who left, who were particularly difficult to recruit. And so these folks reassured the participants that I would be open to listen to them regardless of what they had to say. And so part of reducing the power differential in developing trust is this was an interview process. I thanked students for being there. I welcomed them. My method was a semi-structured interview so I could ask deeper questions to understand their responses in a more complete way. And so just creating the safe space, a judgment-free zone, and having open-ended questions so students could respond how they wanted to. And I spent a lot of time being quiet, listening, acknowledged what they said, documented and coded what they told me as appropriately as I could. And then I always thank the participant for their time. And it was really nice to hear that they thanked me for conducting this research and cited it as important work for them to have their experiences illuminated. And I'm saying that to y'all because as we engage with students from these diverse backgrounds, right, in SpectrumX, that we really want to adopt this method of being welcoming and in developing trust with students and lowering the power differential. As faculty and staff at a university, we can be a little bit intimidating. And so we want to make sure we're being approachable. And I want to share, as the researcher positionality that I had as a Black woman engineer, and having that as an experience, I'm studying experiences of Black engineering students. I wanted to make sure I took good care not to represent my own lived experience as theirs, right? And so that took a lot of planning. And also I experienced a lot of emotion during this because discussing highs and lows and hearing about their challenges, that was really emotionally, tolling. And also I discovered that I made mistakes when I interacted with some of these students who I've known. And so that was a learning opportunity for me as well. So just to talk about the overall study design, I did an interview study, an analysis of institutional data. And so this is kind of the flow chart of what I did with doing the interview, doing coding, developing this data matrix based on my constructs and my conceptual framework, where I would code what I saw in all those interviews. And then I would go back and other researchers to do a member check to make sure we got it right. And then I did what we call the qualitative comparative analysis, which is the method I use to determine what the stayers or leavers were experiencing. I conducted another interview to go deeper into some of the things that were brought up maybe in the first interview and to really hone in on what their experiences were. We did more coding, a member check, and then I developed some case profiles and case studies that I'll share. And I did a lot of analysis of institutional data. I'm going to share some of that, but not all of the data that's in the dissertation, just to kind of give you an idea of what's going on with our Black students studying engineering and, you know, they're leaving and the numbers. So I'll share those with you as well. And so, you know, the first interview, well, the institutional data was focused on the focal university, and I did some work on all the colleges and schools at the university. The enrollment data that I'm looking at was for fall 2019, and then admissions and enrollment data over the last 5 years. And so the interview data, as I mentioned, came from the first interview where we were just talking about the background and how did you choose your major and what's your future looking like and the high and low points. And then in interview 2, I went into a deeper understanding of how the conceptual framework would explain their experiences that mattered for staying and leaving. So I had all these thoughts and ideas, and then going through the process of the qualitative comparative analysis really helped me hone in what that looked like for stayers and leavers. And so I wanted to look at, I'm showing this slide specifically just so you can have an idea of like how many Black students were enrolled in higher education in the fall of 2019. And over 2 million Black students were enrolled, which is about almost 10%. In terms of engineering, only about 32,000, almost 33,000 students were enrolled in engineering, which is about 5.1%. But when we look at the student enrollment at the flagship state university, we had about 810 students enrolled that year, which was only about 2.7% of the student body. But when we looked at engineering, there were 118, which is only 2.2%. So as you can see, like there's some discrepancies in enrollment as compared to the national statistics of enrollment, both in higher ed and in engineering. So this shows enrollment over the last 5 years in the engineering college at the flagship state university. The blue bar is basically who was admitted. Overall enrolled is orange. The gray line is the overall Black students that were admitted. And then the enrollment. As you can see, the enrollment is really low as well compared to the amount of students that were offered to attend the university and the College of Engineering, the engineering college. So what made me very curious and had me curious to study this was as I was looking at the data, I was actually going to study something else. But when I looked at the Black student retention, I said, why in the world are we only graduating the fall 2013 class, Black students 14%? Now, granted, I know the numbers are low, but we're talking about maybe only a few students. When this class, the second year retention was better than the overall retention, 86%. And then we had a steep drop for years from years 2 to 3. And then from the 4th year to 6th year graduation rate, which is the national metric, we go all the way down to 14%. So then I looked at 2014, the fall 2014 folks and the fall 2015 students, and we still had sharp declines. Even this one, we went from 92 to 54, 75 to 44. So what is actually going on? So when I approached analyzing the interview data, again, I coded the interview data and understood the conditions associated with staying and leaving, and there were a ton of those. And then there's a data matrix, and those of you who are engineers on the call would appreciate this, where I assign ones and zeros if I saw the condition occur with a participant or if it didn't, right? And then I had a fuzzy measurement for some things that were kind of in between. So I created a data matrix for each participant. And then I went through this process using the qualitative comparative analysis to identify the multiple plausible pathways for the outcomes of staying or leaving. And so a lot of times I get people who ask, well, what's the one thing that causes them to stay or leave? And I'm going to tell you today, there's not one thing. So we'll talk about that. To the right is the iterative process that's used for the qualitative comparative analysis, that we can start with our theoretical knowledge, but as we go through the process, we may discover new things and have to loop back. So this is a very iterative process to make to understand what those pathways are. I wanted to just show these. I won't go into a lot of the details, but for the QCA process, there are two metrics that are used to identify your results, right? The first one is consistency. And so consistency measures the proportion of cases in a specific configuration that you found doing QCA that displays the outcome. So in that in this diagram where we see consistency, the Venn diagram to the right depicts the concept, right? The leftmost Venn diagram shows that all cases in the set have the outcome. So this set has complete consistency. The middle Venn diagram shows most cases in the set have high consistency. And then the last one to the right shows that it has low consistency. The other measure is coverage, and it measures how much of the outcome, in this case, stayers, is covered by the subset, right? So as you can see, high coverage shows that it takes up more of the stayers circle or the set. And then as you move to the right, it becomes less and less coverage. So we were looking for, I was looking for high consistency, excuse me, I should go back. I was looking for high consistency and high coverage for all of those configurations that we got, okay? And so as we go on, I wanted just to remind you that the racialized social environment includes lots of different things, right? Stereotypes and visualization, positioning students as incapable, all of these things. The one thing I did add that I wanted to point out, because I didn't think of this, was racial, physical, and verbal assault, which we saw that some of the students had experienced, and also isolation. So we had a lot of common conditions that everybody experienced. Not everybody, I should say most of the participants experienced. This concept of funds of knowledge and identity kept emerging. And this concept, and I can answer questions about it later, it talks about the participants going back to either their family, their community, to get advice and to seek help and guidance. Whereas, I was thinking that maybe they would go to their advisor or a counselor on campus. They were going back to their communities. Virtuous and vicious cycles, I think we talked about that we saw that occurring a lot. The robust and fragile resilience responses, we saw a lot. But there were also many of the participants who had mental and physical health issues as a result of studying engineering. So that was I wasn't happy to hear that. And that was, pretty challenging to hear from our participants. But we also learned that many of the students had strong social supports as they studied engineering. Okay, so when we're talking about distinguishing stayers from leavers, there were some of the conditions that emerged, right? And so the Visionary Center is a place where students, first generation students of color, those students who are underrepresented in engineering would go for community, for support, to have friends and participate in organizations and so forth. So we saw folks participating in the center and folks not. Strong academic support, not strong academic support. So the positive and the negative of each one of these. Engineering identity, experiences of a racialized environment. Some students did not at least state that they've experienced the racialized environment. And then financial hardship started to emerge. And it wasn't initially a part of my conceptual framework, but it kept coming up over and over again. And so I'm going to start with the stayers first. And so these three, I am so sorry. After we review the results of the QCA, the answer to questions 2 and 3 about interventions and programs and the student experiences, these three configurations working together emerged as the primary conditions for students who decided to stay. And so as you see, I tried to color code all three of them, right? And so the first one was a configuration where the participants participated in the Visionary Center, had strong academic support, and strong engineering identity. Then we had the purple one, which has 5 of those, not in the Visionary Center, not experiencing a racialized environment, not having financial hardship, not having engineering identity, and having strong academic support. And then the third one, where they did participate in the Visionary Center, not having racialized environment, experiences of the racialized environment, not financial hardship, but did have an engineering identity. And so remember, these were coded before my second interview, so we'll talk about that, all right? But I want to emphasize that these all work together. So the conditions work together, and all 3 of the different configurations work together to explain the experiences of stayers, okay? So I'm going to talk about one case study, Valencia, who was a participant who fell into this configuration, okay? So Valencia was at this time in her 3rd year in engineering. She had made it through the steep retention drop-off between years 2 and 3, but it's not a guarantee that Valencia will graduate. Anything can happen. Valencia shared the Visionary Center as home and where she found her friends. She said that it's a place where normal camaraderie is formed. So she frequently visited the Visionary Center where she felt supported academically and socially. She was also heavily involved in the National Society of Black Engineers chapter here at CU. She appreciated that the university acknowledged that this safe space is needed for Black students and it's a priority. She can also talk comfortably about matters relating to race in the Visionary Center and sees the center as insulating from racial encounters that occur in the university. Regarding her academic support, Valencia made it a habit to engage with TAs and professors for additional assistance when she had questions, to learn from her mistakes. She was very, very much comfortable with doing that. She also had a friend group that doubled as her peer study group, with whom she frequently engaged and studied, okay? And with engineering identity, she had early exposure to the engineering field, which supported her engineering development. And her father is an engineer, which benefited her, right? Because he was a role model for her. And then Valencia's experience working in a national lab. So she had an internship at a national lab that supported her engineering identity development. So even though the experiences of the racialized environment were not salient in her interview, during her second interview, Valencia spoke a lot about her experiences of tokenism as the only Black person in various spaces. She also shared that she experienced imposter syndrome when she was an intern at the National Lab. And she also talked about experiencing the racialized environment with awkward conversations about race, especially when she was the only Black person there. So here's a quote from Valencia as she talks about her engineering identity. So definitely for me, I'm somebody who's very analytical, always asking kind of like those deep questions and wanting to get deeper answers with things. So like that kind of wanting to know how things actually worked. In this quote, Valencia shares her yearning to learn, to get deeper answers to what she's curious about, okay? And so I'm gonna talk to you all also about Elise. So Elise was a part of this configuration to the right, where she was not necessarily involved in the Visionary Center. So she had a lot of nods, but she had strong academic support. She often visited faculty and TAs, those that she was comfortable with. And she had a friend group from freshman year all the way to they graduated, that they all studied chemical engineering together. And they also, so they were friends and it doubled as a study group, okay? She also had a job where she worked for this LearnChemie website. So it afforded her an opportunity to continue to study her concepts in chemical engineering while she was earning money, right? So she talked about asking lots of questions. Her financial situation, she had a lot of struggle with finances and piecemealing how she would pay for college, but it wasn't a hardship to the point where she was forced to leave because she couldn't afford to be in school. So that was quite interesting to hear how she did that. Her engineering identity was very interesting. So she studied really hard. She finished a chemistry degree, but after she graduated, she's not an engineering professional. She decided to do something different. Okay, so that was very interesting. And then in the interview too, she talked about some experiences she had as being called the Black girl. And I wanted to read a couple of quotes about that. And she also talked about her experiences with being tokenized, that she would show up to different like recruiting events to kind of encourage the students to come to the university. And she would notice photos of her being taken without her permission. And those photos were showing up in advertisements and social media for the university without her permission. And that really bothered her. And she talked about racial stress being physically heavy. So the first quote I wanted to share with you is about the Black girl quote. I think it just goes along with there not being a ton of diversity on the flagship state's campus, but there were times where people would describe me as the Black girl, and that is what I am. But it felt a bit isolating that my description could be put into so few words and people would know who they're talking about because it was just me. And then she talked about this weight of carrying this racial stress, right? I feel like when those things that you mentioned happen, it feels like I am physically carrying them with me in a way that is exhausting. And it's like if you're physically carrying something with you, it makes you do other things harder. I think that's true emotionally. If you feel like people are singling you out, it puts this unspoken pressure on you because you're just being watched a little bit more. And that just makes everything more impactful and important, and that's stressful. I don't know, it just carries with you and occupies your brain and maybe makes it harder to focus on things like all of your brain is occupied by that other layer. So she was one of the participants who articulated that best. So now let's talk about the levers. So with the levers, it was a lot more complex. So there were 6 sets of conditions together, working together, that were linked to leaving. And so I'm not going to go through each one of the boxes, but this is these are 2 of the 6 configurations of conditions. Okay. And then here are 2 more, right? And in this case, these 2 financial hardships shows up, not a visionary center, and then the engineering identity. So these folks are identifying as engineers, but still having a hard time. And then these also are a little bit more complex with 5 conditions showing up in those configurations. And so I'm going to talk about Hector. And I could do this for every single one of the levers, but I picked a few of them just to highlight. So Hector was a leaver who left the engineering college and the university after his first year. Regarding his visionary center engagement, Hector was engaged as an engineering access program scholar. So it's a special program for students who needed extra help. Although he was positioned to access resources in the center, he made choices to not fully engage and access those resources in the center. And he also made choices not to fully engage in the program and the resources available to him. Regarding the academic support, Hector was aware of the academic resources available to him, including professors, TAs, and his peers in the engineering access program. He mentioned that he thought there were good resources. However, he chose to limit his engagement with his peers, the TAs, and the professors. Regarding his financial hardship, Hector, during his first interview, he didn't even indicate that he had financial hardship. This was partly due to the fact that his family told him not to worry about expenses, don't worry about finances. However, he walked us through his discovery process of understanding the seriousness of the financial stress and the situation that his parents were having. And then he realized he didn't have enough money for housing for his second year. So to remedy that situation, he applied to be a resident hall assistant, an RA, because then you get your tuition paid for or your housing paid for, right? So that would eliminate and help the financial burden of his family. But he got the RA job, but because of his academic struggles, he couldn't keep it. Okay. And then the not engineering identity, he had a difficult time seeing himself as an engineer due to negative stereotypes and ideas about what an engineer was, right? So he saw an engineer in his family who worked and studied often and who had multiple jobs. And that was not appealing to Hector. So he also expressed this idea that as he became an older engineer, that he would be disposable. And so job security was also a concern to him. He didn't complete an engineering degree, but he did graduate from another university with a biology degree and is still working in a STEM field. Regarding his experiences with the racialized environment, he experienced many, many microaggressions. He was open and transparent with us about the multiple ways he experienced that at the university. These experiences included being excluded by his peers from working on a group engineering project in class, to the point where the students actually were meeting without him and not telling him to purposely exclude him from that project. He also noticed how other students physically distanced themselves from him. He experienced discriminatory faculty actions where a faculty member would help white students in office hours, but not the students of color. He and his white girlfriend were stared at around campus and in social settings, and that was off-putting to him. And then having feelings of being alienated because of his dark skin and his different hair. These experiences led Hector to withdraw, to isolate, and eventually leave the engineering college and the university altogether. And then here's a quote from Hector. I felt embarrassed to go to office hours and ask the professor questions because I didn't want to reinforce that negative stigma of being a Black student and not being well educated. And so there were other very compelling quotes from Hector, but for the sake of time, I'm gonna just go ahead and move on because I wanna leave a few moments for questions. And so as I've talked, I've shared the retention rates with the engineering college and the Black students and how that changed over time. And then as we talked about the intervention programs, how did that figure into navigating the university and their majors? And so those two programs, the Visionary Center and the Engineering Access programs, were pretty consequential practices for supporting student retention. And what's really important is that those places are safe places for students. Many of our institutions are very, very white, and it's difficult for our students to feel like they have some place called home where their friends can gather and study and they can breathe. And so we look at that as really consequential for the success of students. And as I showed you on the different configurations of the conditions, that different conditions that matter, what bubbled to the top was the academic support intertwined with their peer support, you know, that doubling of friends as study groups, and seeing themselves as an engineer, the absence of financial hardship, and their experiences of the racialized environment. I want to really emphasize that there's not one size fits all, that there are multiple plausible pathways for both outcomes, for stayers and leavers, although the leavers are more complex. And I will acknowledge we have limitations. I had limitations to the study. I conducted it at one predominantly white institutions. The sequence of activities, I think if I had done the QCA after the second interview, it kind of could have probably maybe had the outcome look a little different, but still I think, you know, the results we have were pretty meaningful to understanding this phenomenon. And so next steps, I really want to understand how to support Black engineering students with seeing themselves as engineers, and that we can do that in multiple ways. Universities need to expand support structures and adopt policies and practices that support students. There was a different participant who had a very negative experience that went viral on social media. And he was coached to go to the counseling office here on campus. And he said, there are no Black counselors. They don't relate to me. I'm not going, right? So we need to look at those things. And then a deep reflection on what do we project about what an engineer looks like? So we really have to work on the stereotypes that are associated with being an engineer. And really, to really deeply learn about these topics of vulnerability, like I started this presentation on, it does require trust and building relationships over time and listening. And so this is like, students are not going to tell you everything at the beginning. You have to continue to peel back the onion, right? And then also untangling and resolving the racialized environment at the macro level and through these micro levels, the interaction level, right? Which is not an easy thing, but we have to start somewhere, right? And then I'm thinking of the future studies on what is this about, this financial hardship and stress, group dynamics on project teams, the pronounced impact of the racialized environment. Mental and physical health was really a big one. I saw the Black women students really having physical health issues that are manifesting as a result of what they're experiencing on these campuses. And then funds of identity, like how are families and communities supporting students to make good decisions to stay or leave? And I always thank my people. Dr. Bill Pinwell, who's my faculty advisor, members of my dissertation committee, Dr. Angela Bielefeld, Dr. Victoria Hand, Dr. Jana Milford, Dr. Bill Pinwell, and Dr. Terenda White. I thanked everybody, family, friends. I think my husband's on the call. Thank you so much for your support, prayers, encouragement, sacrifices. And to Tiffany, Nick, and Scott, who invited me to present today and welcomed me. And to all of my colleagues in SpectrumX and here at CU Boulder. I don't know everyone who's on the call, but I really appreciate all of you. And then this is my contact information. If you'd like to email me or call and discuss any of this further, I'd be happy to do that. And so that is what I have to present. And so I'd like to leave some time for questions.
Well, I want to, thank you and, for a wonderful presentation and overview and, educating all of us. I mean, it was very moving. I think there's the data, but then there's the case studies and, particularly hearing about, Hector and the challenges that he faced and, the microaggressions. I mean, it really does, you feel empathetic and you try to, trying to understand, how can we do more? But I think there's, macro issues as you talk about that are fundamental. So with that, I know there were a couple of questions in the chat, and I thought rather than myself paraphrasing them, I would invite the speakers to ask their questions. So I think Nick, you had a question about the potential gender differences that were observed. Do you want to bring that to the table?
Sure. I was curious in looking at, I guess the term you use is configurations of these or groupings of these certain characteristics. Mm-hmm. Did you observe any differences in terms of gender identity? Or did you explore that?
I didn't really do a deep dive and explore that. We had women students represented in both stayers and leavers, right? And so I chose 2 women to represent the stayers just because what they had to say just really popped out and really matched what I was trying to express in the configurations. But one of the things I will say, like with the Black women students, there was a real impact on their physical health. So I saw a lot of, the mental stress, the mental health issues, but particularly for women who were well prepared for engineering to study, we're having like these physical challenges. And one particular student, I think studied computer science, notified her professor she had to go to the hospital, right? She wasn't feeling well. And it was like they had to show up to provide, a presentation or turn in an assignment, and the professor said, if you don't show up to class, it's a 0. So her friends were on the way to take her to the hospital, turned around, brought her to class so she could do that. And then she turned right back around and went to the hospital. Right. And so, you know, those things are really sad to hear. But just also learning about, you know, how folks were having these physical ailments because, and they directly connected it, the women students directly connected it to the stress that they were experiencing. So I can look at that. I can go back and look at it and kind of see where, you know, in terms of gender, you know, who fell where. But I also asked about gender diversity identity, right? And so there's some, you know, it's not just male, woman, man, female, you know, there's some students who identify as non-binary in other ways as well. So, and there were 25 students, so there's not a lot of room to really make any conclusions just about that. So.
Understood.
Thank you.
Just, you know, my instincts are that there might be certain configurations might be more relevant or more, you know, more connected with gender identities, but it'd be interesting to see. In other words, what things to watch for, right? Maybe you watch for certain configurations more if a student happens to be a female African-American student. So
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to jump to Sudhakar's question here since it got plussed up. Sudhakar was asking about a comparative study with students who are not diverse students. So let's say the primary white population. I don't know, Sudhakar, if you wanted to ask your question, make your comment for Tanya.
You got it right. So I was just wondering if there are plans for a comparative study so that it can clarify this thing further, because some of the reasons could be simply because some students just don't want to be engineers. I wonder how much of that is a part of this thing. And there is a related question that I did not put in, but that is, were the participants asked if they felt like they were ready for the engineering program?
So, okay, I'm gonna take, because it sounds like two different questions. So I'll take the first one. I think you talked about studying majority student in terms of, you know, staying and leaving. I actually don't have plans to do that. When we look at the retention of majority students in engineering is much higher than Black students and some of the other underrepresented populations. And so for me, that's not something I'm interested in diving into, but I'm sure anyone who's interested could do that and figure that out. And I agree, yeah, there's some students, you know, they come and they're like, oh, this is not what I thought it was, I'm out of here, right? But we should see that at the year 1, maybe year 2, right? But after you're in year 3 and 4 and you're leaving, what else is going on, right? And so, yeah, I think, you know, maybe 20% of the 15 to 20% of the students get into engineering and may not want to study it, right? Now, of course, I forgot the second part of your question.
The second question I was asking was, were the students asked at the beginning of the study or later if they felt like they were prepared coming into the program, that they were prepared to take on the rigors of engineering education?
I don't know if I directly asked them if they felt that they were prepared. I asked them more about, you know, what resources they feel like they had access to be successful. I will share, can I just make an anecdotal opinion, you know, kind of my own personal opinion. Just observing like the conditions in which a lot of our Black students study K-12, right? Many of them come from under-resourced schools, and, you know, many of them experience folks going, you're studying engineering, why would you want to do that, right? And so I think many of them show up here with good intentions, really, to study engineering, they've gone against the grain. You know, many folks are telling them why, you know, that's not, you know, this is what an engineer is, right? So I didn't ask them the question if they felt prepared, because I felt like it's pretty courageous for a Black student anywhere to show up to study engineering. That's my personal opinion. And I think there's resources available for students, even if they show up and they're not prepared. So, and then Cynthia put some stuff in the chat if you want to talk about that.
And the reason I brought the second question up is engineering already is a fairly time-consuming affair for the students. Now, for these students, even if resources are available to them on the campus, using them still adds to their workload, right? Yeah. So I wonder if that just adds up and the cumulative pressure is just doesn't make continuing in engineering seem worthwhile.
Yeah, I wish I could answer all of that. I would like to, we can talk more if you'd like. Please reach out to me. I'd love to explore this a little further. I would also like to get a couple more questions out of the chat. I see Julie, I'm not sure, I'm looking at the bottom. Julie had a question about the Visionary Center.
Yeah, so Julie, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. Terrific presentation.
Thank you.
Sounds like you've got a lot of work ahead for you. Just a couple of things. Can you say a little bit more about the Vision Center? Is it just for engineering students, and what happens there, or what is intended to happen for all students? And then the second part of it, from the things that you heard, did you have things, recognizing that there are going to be different weights for different elements of this, what things do you think might be the most important to try to tackle? Not that any of them are not important, but
right.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Visionary Center is kind of this place. It's a community. It's a physical location where students. It's designed for underrepresented students to come and have a place to just be who they are, right? It's also an inclusive center, so it welcomes everybody. Just because you may be from a demographic that's overrepresented in engineering doesn't mean they close the door, right? You can still walk in and engage. There's programming, there's social stuff happening there. The different student societies that support diverse students in engineering are supported through there. There's a free tutoring center physically located there. There's staff who look at a holistic way of supporting students. So not just academically, we want to make sure you're good, but how are you doing? I mean, you know, and sometimes students would say, hey, this is what's going on with my family. You know, I need to maybe drop my class load. And it's like, okay, well, then do you need some support with counseling? So there was more of a wraparound of service to support these, you know, to support students. And so, yeah, that was the Visionary Center. And all engineering students are welcome. And we also, you know, there's students who are in and out from all walks of life. Even non-engineering students can come and participate. So it's a pretty open, inclusive environment. And so when you talk about the factors and you talk